Good evening and welcome to The Report with me, Chris Bambery. As the fight against the Islamic State continues, US-led airstrikes in Syria began in the early hours. While some are hesitant to join any military action in Syria, many Arab nations are at the forefront of the fight. Yasmin Kutin has more on this story.
The United States and its allies have begun bombing positions held by Islamic State in Syria. These are the first such attacks in Syria since forming a coalition to confront the group just 2 weeks ago. The attacks began this morning with at least 20 strikes in the first 2 hours. Reports have stated that areas of Raqqa were hit and tens of IS fighters killed. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said more than 20 members of ISIL were killed in strikes on 2 of the organization's positions in Raqqa province. The strikes completely destroyed the 2 positions, as well as vehicles stationed there. Airstrikes were also carried out against positions of Al-Qaeda's Syria affiliate, the Nusra Front, who have been working with the Free Syrian Army and other rebel groups in the fight against President Assad. The Syrian Foreign Ministry have confirmed that they were notified of the attacks. Jordan, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates are all partnered with the US against IS, with Jordanian officials confirming their participation in the strikes. The coalition to fight Islamic State also includes NATO allies and Australia. The attacks in Syria come just a day after IS spokesman Abu Muhammad al-Adnani called on supporters to attack foreigners wherever they are. If you can kill a disbelieving American or European, especially the spiteful and filthy French, or an Australian or a Canadian, or any other disbeliever from the disbelievers waging war, including the citizens of the countries that joined the coalition against the Islamic State, then rely upon God and kill him in any manner. IS had previously maintained that they weren't at war with the US and its allies, rather their key goal being to strengthen their state. The IS group say they have established a caliphate across swathes of land in Syria and Iraq. The US has conducted 190 airstrikes across Iraq as part of President Barack Obama's strategy to destroy IS. 2 weeks ago, President Obama said he would destroy and degrade IS after the killing of 2 US journalists. Over the weekend, IS stormed an Iraqi military camp just an hour's drive away from the capital in Baghdad, in the latest raid since June when they captured the northern city of Mosul. The group also released further video material, including a second video with British journalist John Cantley. The video and letter released before the strikes began, the magnitude of their impact is yet difficult to ascertain. But with Arab nations joining the fight in Syria and bombs falling upon groups outside of IS, the dynamics in Syria have inevitably changed. Yasmin Khatun, The Report, Islam Channel.
In the studio to discuss this, we are joined by Guney Yildiz, a BBC journalist, and Dr Rebwar Fatah, who is the director of the think tank Middle East Consultancy Services. Welcome to you both. Can I start with you, Guney? Can airstrikes alone defeat Islamic State? It wasn't enough in Afghanistan, it's not been enough in the history of any sort of similar conflicts. Airstrikes alone, can you win?
Well, in Afghanistan you have the mountainous region. It's difficult to penetrate into places where militants were hiding. But we've seen in the last week or so 190 attacks on ISIS positions inside Iraq. It's hard to assess how successful they were, but in order to we need to remember the area ISIS is controlling. They're controlling the Iraq's second largest city. They're controlling Raqqa, and other places. It will be difficult for ISIS to move in between these cities, these places, when there's sustained airstrikes.
But surely the problem here is that they do eventually need the Americans' reliable ground forces, and they don't seem to have them at the moment. And surely that points to the fact that, I hate to use the phrase boots on the ground, but that's where it's going to lead.
I mean, that's true, because I mean the airstrike will have a limited impact because ISIS cannot keep military bases anymore. And yesterday, well, today, some of those bases were bombed. But America also admits that they need ground troops, and they said today, this morning, they're going to train Syrian opposition, whatever the opposition is really. So I don't know what sort of opposition they rely on. And they say that it will take a year in order to prepare the ground war, which is quite a way.
But surely one of the problems here is some of the opposition forces in Syria are part of the airstrikes. I mean, they've been on Nusra Front, etc., are being attacked as well. Leading some to suggest that this might actually benefit the Assad regime.
I mean, the rise of ISIS has been largely has benefited Assad regime up until recently. They haven't been fighting against the Assad regime, but fighting, grabbing lands from different rebel groups up until recently. But in the last 2 months, they attacked the Assad regime as well. But they're at a position that they're a threat to the Kurdistan region, Assad regime, United States, and Iraq at the same time. That's why they're having these airstrikes. But boots on the ground is problematic with the realities of the region for some other reasons too. Turkey is against any kind of ground attacks. Turkey is also against airstrikes as well. And the Assad regime will be against boots on the ground as well. And also the Kurds who are doing the fighting against ISIS are against boots on the ground, American forces coming.
All the Kurds in Iraq or Kurds in Syria?
Kurds in Syria and Kurds in Turkey who are active in the region too. So the KRG's position, Kurdistan region's position, is different, but most of the fighting is taking place in Syria and other Kurds who are affiliated with Syrian Kurds against ISIS. And what they want is arms supplies, like aid to them, rather than having American soldiers or any foreign soldiers fighting with them.
But isn't this the stuff of a conspiracy theory that the Assad regime was happy to see the rise of Islamic State?
There's a conspiracy theory. I mean, because the Islamic State has been so far very effective, as my friend said, in eliminating other opposition groups. But then ISIS itself become very powerful group. Are they going to stop there, or are they going, after they becoming the only opposition in the region with all these resources, with all these military hardware, maybe they will be ready to attack Assad regime? I mean, we don't really know. We speculate.
Can I just return to Turkey? I mean, Turkey haven't given permission for NATO bases to be used against these airstrikes. They seem very lukewarm about this. Why is that?
Up until recently, the main reason was that Turkey didn't join the coalition against ISIS. Was because Turkey had around 46 Turkish hostages were at the hands of ISIS, but they've been released a couple of days ago. But Turkey has been very adamant in trying to bring down the Assad regime, and have been helping different groups, including jihadists. But it's difficult to verify that they really helped ISIS as well, but they've helped most of the Syrian opposition up until recently. So it will be very difficult for them to turn back and to side in practice with Assad regime against these groups. And also there's a certain level of public support towards ISIS inside Turkey, and ISIS will not be shy of carrying out bomb attacks in Turkey. That's another worry for Turkish government. But we need to mention also the ISIS version of Salafi Islam hasn't been strong in Turkey because of the strength of Sufi tariqas and other groups.
And just returning that for a second, I mean, have the Turks actually shut the border with Syria to stop ISIS selling their oil in the international market, or getting new fighters and arms?
I mean, the media reports also suggest, of course, they have to be verified. I'm only relying on the media reports, shows that the borders are open and ISIS fighters moving. And even there are reports that, even on YouTube, that ISIS wounded are treated in Turkish hospitals.
And can I just ask you, there's this list of Arab states, Saudi Arabia most prominently, Jordan very importantly, and various of the Persian Gulf states who all signed up to this coalition. Have they actually been taking part in these airstrikes? I
mean, the coalition is a very loose term they used. All it has been reported is that one Arab state, just one, we don't know which one, took part of the airstrikes, and the others are just coalition, which is rather surprising because they were allegedly supporting ISIS until recently.
I mean, how solid is this coalition in your opinion?
I mean, for example, Saudi Arabia, which shares to a certain extent the Islamic ideology behind ISIS, the Wahhabi Salafist ideology. Maybe we can make have a comparison similar to Pakistan and Afghanistan, which stays on both sides of the equation. On one side, helping some parts of Taliban, but on the other side, siding with the United States against Taliban too. I think Saudi Arabia is doing maybe, or not the regime, but individuals, prominent individuals there, are doing a similar kind of game here, helping ISIS to a certain extent, but also being on the other side of it.
And can I just ask you, how effective have the Peshmerga, who the Americans hold up as from the Kurdish autonomous region of Iraq, Americans hold them up as a key ally on the ground, how effective have they been against the Islamic State?
It was a bit of a disappointment for Kurdistan regional government, actually, to see Peshmerga not being effective in defending Yazidi Kurdish areas in Sinjar Mountain, who faced massacres under the hands of ISIS. Up until recently, Peshmerga was seen as a formidable force that could stop ISIS. But Peshmerga hasn't been doing any fighting almost 20 years now. The days where Peshmerga was fighting against Iraqi army in a semi-guerrilla warfare were long gone. And it took them a week or 2 weeks, actually, in order to fight back against ISIS with the help of air support from the United States. And
some of the key allies go back to the coalition. I mean, Jordan has had some problems at home domestically. Saudi is nervous, I think, about this. I mean, how serious should they take that ISIS could be a threat internally?
There's no doubt that ISIS could be a threat to all these countries in the region. Maybe that's why they are not announcing which state took part in the airstrikes. And I think, looking at the other way, ISIS was very effective to, if you like, destroy the Iranian or Shia so-called plan in the region. It was very effective. But now you have this Frankenstein monster. It's really very, very difficult to get rid of.
Of course, there is one state with a strong interest in combating the Islamic State in the region, which is Iran. We're going to come back to that shortly. But, I mean, do you see there's been an opportunity for Iran to come back out of the cold, if you like, internationally?
Actually, the existence of Islamic State, I don't see it as a strategic threat to Iran, because it strengthens Hezbollah and radicalizes lots of Shiites. And also, it maybe, to a certain extent, the existence of ISIS didn't force Iran's ally, Assad regime, out of power. So in those senses, Islamic State is not strong enough to the fight against Iran. I mean, Hezbollah was successful in fighting against jihadists, other jihadists in Syria.
And how do you see this planning out? I mean, how long would it take, really, for effective ground forces to be on the ground to back up these airstrikes? You were saying a year.
American plan is a year, but I think it will be much longer, because ISIS, I mean, if the bombing is very effective, then they will blend into the cities, into the town with ordinary people, and they are already running the second biggest city in Iraq, and they occupy a place like Raqqa and the rest of them. So they are blending into public.
And the Iraqi army has not been very effective at all.
And they're not going to be effective for a while.
And do you see this inevitably, the fact the Americans are going to get drawn in?
There's one formidable force who's been fighting against ISIS and pushing them back in the last 2 years. That's the Syrian Kurds. And they have been successfully defending their towns in north of Syria. This is the group who have been fighting against the NATO's second largest army for over 30 years. I'm talking about the PKK and Turkey. And so they are very well experienced in guerrilla warfare, but they are underarmed. Any kind of air strikes combined with the efforts of Kurdish fighters there can push ISIS from the north of the border.
Excellent. We're now going to move on to the question of Turkey. Turkey has begun to close a number of its border crossings with Syria, following the temporary opening of its border to allow Syrian Kurds to escape persecution from the forces of the Islamic State. The United Nations estimates that about 130,000 Kurdish refugees have entered the country since the weekend. With more on this and the rest of today's top stories, here's Nathaniel Amos-Sansom.
Turkey has temporarily opened its borders to allow thousands of Kurdish refugees to enter the country from Syria, as the UN warns that the numbers escaping the conflict are some of the worst since the war began. The Kurds fleeing to Turkey were escaping persecution from ISIS forces in the northern half of Syria. But the influx of refugees, however, has led to increased tensions in eastern Turkey, where the country's already restless Kurdish minority has protested against the limitations the government has imposed upon opening the border. On Sunday, the UN warned that some 100,000 people crossed the border between Friday and Sunday alone.
We're approaching in Turkey 1.6 million refugees, and now over 100,000 influx, and quite frankly, we don't know when those numbers will end. We don't know what the future holds. We need assistance for core life-saving support.
A French national, reportedly kidnapped by Algerian fighters sympathizing with the Islamic State, has been confirmed by the French government. The hostage, named as Javier Godel, was taken near the Tajika Mountains in eastern Algeria on Sunday by a group calling themselves the Caliphate Soldiers, who hold links with the Islamic State. In a video posted online, the group said it would kill Godel if the French government did not halt its intervention in Iraq. President François Hollande said in a statement that he has spoken to the Algerian Prime Minister, Abdelmalek Sallal, and that the two countries were cooperating at all levels to find and liberate the hostage. The Uyghur academic and activist Ilham Tohti has been sentenced to life in prison by a Chinese court for the crime of separatism. Tohti was found guilty by a people's court in Umqai, the capital of the western Xinjiang province, home to China's Turkic Uyghur Muslim people. He was accused of spreading subversive and separatist ideas via the forum website Uyghur Online, which he set up in 2005. Tohti's supporters claim that the site was just an open forum for dialogue between Uyghur and Han Chinese peoples. Human rights groups have been shocked by the severity of the ruling and have strongly condemned the way in which Tohti has been treated since his arrest earlier this year. Israel's military announced today that it has shot down a Syrian warplane over the Golan Heights, in the first such incident for 3 decades. Israeli military sources said the plane had apparently crossed by accident into Israeli-controlled airspace, but that it was not on a mission to attack Israeli targets.
This morning, a Syrian aircraft infiltrated Israeli airspace. The IDF, our Air Force, the Patriot Air Defense Battery in the Golan Heights, intercepted the incoming airplane, and we are currently looking into the circumstances of this flight.
Views of the Syrian border area where the incident occurred appear to show fighting ongoing between Syrian rebels and the forces of President Bashar al-Assad, with smoke rising from numerous locations. Israel last downed a manned Syrian aircraft in 1985, when Israeli fighter jets on a surveillance mission over Lebanon destroyed 2 Syrian MiG-23s that approached them. The British Prime Minister David Cameron is to meet the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani when the two are present at the UN Climate Change Summit in New York, the first such meeting of the heads of the British and Iranian governments for over 35 years. At the historic meeting, the Prime Minister is expected to call for the two countries to cooperate in their fight against ISIS forces in Iraq and Syria, but will call on Iran to drop its support for the Syrian regime of President Bashar al-Assad. Downing Street also said that the main issue of Iran's nuclear program would be raised, saying in a statement that it is a rare opportunity to embolden its prosperity, but that a deal would only be possible if Iran is willing to be realistic about the future scope of its nuclear program. Nathaniel Amos Sansom, The Report.
Still with me in the studio to discuss today's news is Guney Yildiz, a BBC journalist, and Dr Rebwar Fatah, director of the Middle East Consultancy Services. But first, let's see what some people have been saying about the news on Twitter. Now, maybe unsurprisingly, many are tweeting about the US airstrikes on ISIS targets. Asa Winstanley, who's an investigative journalist and associate editor of Electronic Intifada, draws our attention to the chaotic and generally contradictory situation in the Middle East, saying, US and regional dictators bomb ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. Syrian government tacitly takes part, bombing Al-Qaeda, and Israel responds by downing a Syrian jet. Now, I want to return to the question of Turkey and the Kurds. I mean, because the obvious answer might be if the Syrian Kurds are fighting back effectively against the Islamic State, would be to supply arms and weaponry for them. That might be a policy for the United States. But that would not be popular in Ankara, would it?
It's not. It won't be definitely popular in Ankara, but it's not also popular with United States as well, because not the Syrian Kurds, but their affiliates, the PKK, is still on terror lists and considered terrorist organization by EU and the United States. For Ankara, in the last 2 years, there has been a peace process with their own Kurds, but it's a delicate peace process, and despite the peace process, Ankara wouldn't want to see Kurds having a strong ground in Syria, so that they will have a strong card on the negotiation table. And the Kurdish side has been arguing that Turkey's approach to Syrian Kurds is like a measure for Turkey's sincerity in the peace process.
I just want to turn to you to this question of refugees. I mean, 1.6 million refugees from Syria in Turkey. Here in Europe, there is almost hysteria about the idea of a few thousand refugees coming into these islands. I mean, isn't this somewhat hypocritical of the West, to be watching this situation and not providing refuge for these people?
I mean, no doubt the humanitarian issue is a vital part of the political issue. And it's not only this 1.3, because there's and there are probably others which blended into the relatives and cousins and so on. This is another worry for Turkey, maybe thinking that the huge refugees from Syria may destabilize the country, especially most of these refugees are Kurds moving from the border and they have relatives on the other side. That doesn't really help Turkey at all. Yes, it's hypocritical of the West, if you like, just, a couple of refugees crossing over. We all started shouting, the country is flooded with refugees. You can see the headlines every so often.
That's the point, isn't it? If even a few thousand refugees arrived at Heathrow from Syria, there'd be forces in Britain saying, this island is full and all the rest of it. Turkey and other neighbouring states like Jordan will have to shoulder this burden in Lebanon.
Exactly. Turkey has the highest number of refugees from Syria in the region. But in terms of international assistance, Turkey is getting almost the lowest of assistance from the international community. And Turkish government has been arguing that 65,000, I think, the total number of Syrian refugees in Europe is less than the latest wave of Kurdish refugees flowing into Turkey.
That's a fantastic and interesting statistic, actually, in terms of that. I want to come back to Turkey and its regional ambitions, because up until now, Turkey has been trying to deploy as a regional ambition. It's called the Ottoman strategy of winning influence in the former countries of the Ottoman Empire. Is this quite a setback that it's broken? It's out of favour, if you like, with the United States.
I believe that Turkey's policy is not typical of Turkey's recent policy with ISIS that we have seen, and not. It's the way it played double standard. Turkey is very happy to provide the air bases to attack other places, but not Syrian Assad regime. I think there's a bit of setback in Turkish foreign policy, and not being part of the coalition is also another problem for Turkey. I understand all the issues related to internally to Turkey. For example, the problem you mentioned earlier, maybe the ISIS can be effective in Turkey, bombing and so on. Whether they can find the ground there, I'm not sure. But yes,
how secure is President Erdogan in Turkey?
He recently won the majority of the votes in the first round of presidential elections, so he has a strong support base. And as long as he keeps the peace process with the Kurds, helped him a lot, because Kurds are the most could be volatile opposition in Turkey. Having them pacifying Kurds helped Erdogan to save himself from the Gezi protests, for example, and also largest corruption investigation, mishandling of a mine disaster last spring. There's strong opposition against Erdogan, but it's very much fragmented. And
OK, thank you. Now looking at other tweets, the sentencing of Professor Ilham Tohti has caused outrage online, with many bringing attention to China's pure human rights record. Samuel Wade, deputy editor at China's Digital Times, makes the grave assessment that China has issued a clear signal to Uyghurs, hoping for change through rational channels, will be disappointed. Now, I just want to come back to China, because in some ways it's trying to project itself worldwide as being sort of non-imperialist. It's investing in Africa and Asia. This is a reminder that internally China has got its own, if you like, almost imperialist issues.
Well, I mean, China has a lot of internal problems, but there's no doubt that China is playing a major role in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, when it comes to trade in oil and so on. But the internal problem remain there with the ethnicities, with all sorts of other groups within China.
The Uyghur that are of Turkish origin, I mean, they have suffered real oppression, as I understand it, in China.
Yes, they have. I mean, they claim to have suffered lots of levels of discrimination, and physically they suffered as well. And nobody can deny that China is facing some level of extremist Islamist threat from Uyghurs. But this latest sentencing, the person is, the doctor is a moderate. It's difficult to understand. He's non-violent. So a government facing an extremist threat, but jailing a moderate, it's difficult to understand.
Thank you, gentlemen. And finally, David Cameron's impending meeting with the Iranian president has got many talking. Faisal Islam, who's a political editor at Sky News, wonders if the first such UK-Iran meeting since 1979 at the United Nations General Assembly in New York could signal that the UK's new role might be to try diplomacy first. I mean, this is the first meeting, I'm just checking the dates here, since the toppling of the Shah back in 1979. I mean, it's incredible, a major country in the world. I mean, how far has Iran been out of the loop here?
Iran may be not in contact with Britain, but Iran has been a major player in the region, and it will be very difficult to ignore the role of Iran in that region, in Iraq, with Turkey, with even towards Afghanistan and so on. So I believe Britain and other Western countries really have no option except dealing with Iran, and because there are so many files open when it comes to nuclear, when it comes to Iraq, when it comes to all other human rights violations and so on. I believe they just have to bite the bullet and establish links with Iran. And
just the style of President Rouhani, it seems to have caught the West slightly off hope. I mean, this is not confrontational. He can speak good English. He was studying in Glasgow. They seem to have sort of not been able to cope with this in some ways, this new public relations offensive by Tehran.
Yes, and the relations between the West and Iran, and lots of status quo is changing, both in the Middle East and in the world. The deal on nuclear, the negotiations on nuclear program caught many people by surprise. People were expecting an armed attack on Iran, and suddenly we had that news. And between Iran and Britain, Iran sees Britain as the little Satan, like compared to
the big Satan.
Compared to the big Satan, the United States. But the popular conception of Britain is like Britain is the brain of conspiracy against Iran. Maybe it's not like carrying out all the conspiracy itself.
The 1979 revolution, I mean, it was a big blow for the United States in particular, wasn't it? And haven't really got quite over that.
That's correct. Because Iran turned over and become from a friendly country or partner, probably the main partner in the Middle East with America, become probably the most hostile country against America, and we have seen the ripples of that since then.
Well, we'll have to end the conversation there as it's time for a break. But after, we'll come back and be comparing the situation of human rights in Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territories, following the killing of the 2 Palestinians suspected of killing 3 Israeli teenagers in the West Bank earlier this summer. So please do rejoin us then.